Good evening, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed your game this Saturday, wherever you've been. Crewe Alexandra, another victory for Lee Bell's men, 1-0 against High Flyers Notts County. Fantastic achievement for Crewe to win this game. To say that they're without a number of key players, Jack Powell in midfield, Zach Williams on the left side of defence as well, Chris Long, who's such a crucial goal scorer for them, and a number of other players, including some of the younger lads that they would have instinctively gone to in terms of the match day squad, like Matthias Holicek and Owen Lunt. So they really were sort of restricted in what was available in terms of sort of possible game changers from the bench. Charlie Finney came on, possibly Callum Adjias, who's just come through the academy. Might have been a contender as well. I don't think he did get minutes in the end, but it shows you Lee Bell was really down to the bare bones, and Crewe had to dig deep, and so there's one school of thought that says Notts County, considering that they produced I would say by far the best half of football that these two sides produced between them in terms of their second half display, where they really dictated proceedings and sort of pinned Crewe into their defensive third. And maybe on that basis, a draw, would have been a fair result. And yet, on the other hand, I don't begrudge Crewe the victory because of their ability to just dig in such adverse circumstances. And, they don't have championship level players like Dan Crowley and David McGoldrick. Now, that's not to say Notts County aren't limited as well. They've got John Bostock wasn't fit to make the team. Of course, Matty Palmer's out for the season, which I think is a massive loss. And obviously, you bear that in mind, of course, because Notts County don't have the depth of, some of their automatic promotion rivals like a Stockport or a Wrexham. But still, I think you've got to credit Crewe. And while I still think that they're actually at a relatively early stage of their development as a footballing outfit, when you think of the time it's taken for Steve Davis and David Artell to build really top end sides in League Two, I think that they're possibly a couple of seasons off that Crewe in terms of development, and I do think that with that in mind, we've actually got to keep our expectations for Crewe Alexandra quite guarded, given not to sort of go too much on the 4 or 5 year cycles theory at Crewe, but they are into, probably last season was about consolidation for the Alex. This season, I think, is about progression. I think if Crewe can finish in the top half and whilst developing the likes of Conor O'Riordan and Joel Tappener, I think that would be a fantastic season for the Alex. Tappener, of course, missing as well. Obviously, sometimes in football you can raise expectations, but you can't lower them. And obviously, naturally, fans are going to enjoy the ride. They're going to get excited about what's possible this season. But I still think you've got to keep everything in check and maybe not expect too much too soon. But listen, what a season they're having, and I think that just goes to show what an incredible job Lee Bell is doing for such sort of speedy progress and just the togetherness that he's built in this team. I think Crewe sides at their worst would have probably folded in those kind of circumstances. They would have buckled into the pressure, and maybe that's a little bit of a narrative, I suppose, because Notts County did create chances in that second half. Maybe Crewe rode their luck at times, but I also think that the way they defended, Conor O'Riordan was outstanding, and actually they kind of made it really difficult for Notts County to break into the final third. I think when it comes to Notts County, first of all, I think, as I mentioned earlier, missing Matty Palmer and missing John Bostock is huge for them, especially considering I think there is a pretty significant drop off between those two in midfield and the rest of the options available to Luke Williams. Some would argue that's slightly self-invited, you would say, given Notts County didn't bring in an extra midfielder, and I suppose that was a hard sell, wasn't it, to bring a first team ready midfielder into Notts County when Luke Williams put so much faith into John Bostock and Matty Palmer, and there was a world in which they could have started 40+ league games this season, and a midfielder that had been good enough to start regularly for another team in League Two would have just been twiddling their thumbs on the bench. So not an easy situation by any means. Look, I think Jim O'Brien did okay in the second half. I don't want to criticise him. I've been a massive fan of him in the past, certainly going back to sort of his Barnsley and Coventry days in the mid-2010s. He was a really good presser. He's 35, 36 now, isn't he? And I don't think he's ever been a great technician generally. I think Jim O'Brien at his best is a workhorse, but naturally as you get older, I don't think he was slow today or by any means. He's a cracking professional, but obviously you lose that little bit of athleticism and freshness. And then Sam Austin, you're looking at converting him from an attacking midfield role. Now, of course, Luke Williams does seem to like to convert attack-minded players into deeper roles, and I can understand why. But I think that's a pretty significant factor behind probably quite a disjointed first half performance from Notts County. They still had their moments. There was one chance on the turnover, I think, where Dan Crowley just showed why he's such a top creator at this level, slipping in that ball for Mecca Langstaff, who I don't think could quite find the finish on that occasion. But yeah, I think it was difficult for Notts County to get Crowley into the game more prominently, certainly in the first half. And David McGoldrick as well. I thought McGoldrick put a lot of work in. I think he was a bit like a second striker at times in the press. But actually in possession, I think McGoldrick was dropping deep a lot, and probably partly because of the midfield issues that I've mentioned. And I actually think that maybe that had an impact, meant Notts took a hit in the final third in terms of getting him on the ball in the right areas. So I think there's a trade-off, because when you've not got as much quality in central midfield, you probably do want McGoldrick influencing the game more. But then, there's a trade-off there. I want to come to probably quite a controversial opinion of mine on Notts County, which is that while in the right system, Carl Cameron, I think, can be a top defender at this level. And while I think Jody Jones has been in absolutely phenomenal form this season, and in the second half this afternoon, he was brilliant. I still feel the dynamic between Kyle Cameron and Jody Jones isn't quite right. I think both those players are better than Adam Chickson individually. However, as a dynamic, I would argue that Carl Cameron at left centre-back with Adam Chickson, when he's fit again, he was absent for today, at left wing-back, or Adam Chickson at left centre-back and Jody Jones at left wing-back, is a better dynamic than Carl Cameron and Jody Jones. And the reason I say that is because of a theory that I've kind of developed about Notts County so far this season, watching the extended highlights. This is the first time I've watched them live, so I'm not an expert, and I'm certainly not going to pretend I know better than Luke Williams, who's a manager I rate incredibly highly. I know he's done some absolutely extraordinary work, and it's probably a credit in many ways to Notts County and what they've achieved over the last 18 months that I'm actually holding them to these high standards, because realistically I should be holding Notts County to the standards of the playoff pack. But actually, because of the work that Luke Williams has done, that's so brilliant, that means I am comparing them to the likes of Stockport, who are backed by mega rich owners, to Wrexham, who are backed by mega rich owners, to Mansfield, who are having a brilliant season as well, and well back, and probably better back than Notts County by the Radfords themselves, although they have maybe a little bit arguably, but they've still got a fantastic team. Something's not quite right if Notts County want to stay in the automatic promotion contender promotion race in terms of that left side of defence, in my opinion, because Jody Jones, I don't think has defensive instincts as a wing back, because and that's not his fault, because he's a converted winger, but it's still an ongoing process for him to become this sort of complete do-it-all wing back. I don't think he's quite there yet, as brilliant as brilliant going forward, like so many jinking runs in that second half, delight to watch and all the rest of it. Doesn't have those defensive instincts. Carl Cameron, I don't think is. I think you miss that little bit of aggression sometimes in terms of defending those wide areas in the defensive third. I think because he's converted from a different type of centre-back role. I think when you're a left centre-back in a three, you're kind of a cross between a centre-back and a left-back. And I don't know that Carl Cameron has enough of the left-back impulse naturally in him. So I would say if you're playing Jody Jones as a left wing-back, I would say play a converted fullback as a left centre-back, and then play a natural centre-back on the right of the back three, and then play a natural wing-back at right wing-back. So there's a kind of a balance, because when you pair a centre-back by trade with a winger by trade on the flanks, I think there's a bit of a chasm, because for different reasons, neither of the players quite wants to sort of address that corridor of uncertainty. And I think what Notts need is a bit of pace, strength, athleticism, aggression in one of the wide centre-back roles, and then possibly the same in the other wing-back role on the opposite flank, if that makes sense. That's how I see it, because I think for me, this might come across as though I'm being harsh on Notts County or holding them to unfair standards, and it's partly because it's partly frustration, because I know how good Notts County can be. I actually, I've seen Stockport this season, and I think they're a very efficient side. I think they've got lots of individual quality. I don't, in terms of tactical and stylistic ceilings, I actually think Notts County's higher, and I think Notts County are millimetres away from being a side that could win 10 games in a row, similar to what Stockport have done. But those millimetres are also significant millimetres, if that makes sense. And I guess one of those is sort of fine tuning those wide defensive issues, which I think have plagued Notts County all season. I think if you can find the solution to those, either by bringing Adam Chickson back in, which I think is what should happen, or by bringing in an extra midfielder in January. I think January is going to be a really interesting one for Notts County, and I'm sorry if you're a Crewe fan and you're watching this for a bit of insight on Crewe. We'll come to you later, but I'm just sort of on a bit of a Notts County stream of consciousness at the moment. I'm really interested to see how they play January, because talking to Notts County fan called Adam at the train station earlier, one of the things he was mentioning was that Luke Williams is so big on being able to trust his players, because his instructions are so niche. He likes to feel like his players can understand them inherently before he trusts them with a lot of game time. And I think that's completely understandable in so many ways. I totally get it. And I think in the long run, that's going to be huge for Notts County. It's part of how Luke Williams has been able to do what he's done. On the other hand, there is another side to this, though, which is that I think Notts County are going to have to dip into the loan market, because I don't think they're necessarily the type of club that's going to spend big on squad depth. I appreciate that might seem a little confusing from the outside, because they've brought in Dave McGoldrick, they've brought in Dan Crowley, who McGoldrick certainly is championship capable, and I would argue Crowley as well. However, they don't really invest in squad depth. They feel like they can get by with versatility from lots of players. However, I think that this dependence on Bostock and Palmer, well, Palmer's out for the season first and foremost, and then Bostock is in the latter stages of his career. Can you rely on Bostock to start every game between his return and the end of the season? Probably not. So I would say, from a Notts County point of view, just cover yourself. Just make sure that you've got someone who's got the who can bring something to this midfield, because I don't think Jim O'Brien is going to get Notts County into the top three. I'm not sure Sam Austin in central midfield is going to get Notts County into the top three. And I think that the right one or two midfield additions in the loan market if you're willing to if Luke Williams is willing to just accelerate that process a little bit, and bring in maybe a sort of a defensive option who's really strong, with the qualities I've mentioned in those wide 1v1 duels. I think that could be a real game changer for Notts County if they can keep much of their first 11 fit, because I know they're not going to go huge on depth. Yeah, on the other hand, I can also see the argument for the club not going too big on January and actually taking a more philosophical view about this season and thinking this is a process, we're going to be quite patient about it, and if we don't go up this season, it's not the end of the world, and maybe we might be more ready for League One in an extra season's time, and I kind of understand that, but there's also part of me that sort of that sees what Notts County are capable of, and I just feel like they're so close, and I just think those extra 2 or 3 final pieces of the puzzle could make a huge difference. But then Crewe Alexandra, Conor O'Riordan was outstanding this afternoon. Demetrio defended his box incredibly well, played a really good key pass in the second half too. I think Luke Offord as well. He sort of sometimes part of the defence, sometimes into midfield, did a really good job, I think, on Dave McGoldrick, and I think his aggression kind of allows him to switch between different roles in game, which I think is a really useful option. Rio Adabi, by the way, people were saying last season he can't defend, and this season, this afternoon, the first half, he put in a lovely last-ditch challenge that was crucial, and I love that moment because it kind of showed Adabi has got that defensive awareness, and I think if you can add that to his game, then look, credit to Rio Adabi, because I think because Crewe are a club that's often so loyal to academy graduates. 1 or 2 occasions in recent history, that's kind of been a bit of a double-edged sword, and and maybe from an Adabi point of view, you're kind of worried about history repeating itself a little bit. But I think Adabi this season, he needed a big season, and he seems to be having it. So well done to him. And then what about Joe White as well? Certainly stepped up into Jack Powell's mantle. What really interests me actually is that in the second half, I would have expected. No, first half, sorry. I was actually expecting it to be Conor Thomas that would stay deep for those transitional attacks, and Joe White to be the more attacking one, because when he played at Hartlepool, he played right of a midfield 3, but certainly with the one. They had a holding midfielder called Nicky Featherstone at the base, and White was one of the midfielders that was kind of given the freedom to sort of overlay the right flank. And excuse me, I think with that in mind, I kind of expected White to be given more freedom. But perhaps Lee Bell was thinking he actually wants White to stay quite disciplined, because he wants his technical ability on the ball. So when the ball comes back into the midfield areas, he's in a position to dictate, to switch the play. And I can kind of see that. I think he had a fantastic game this afternoon. I would say on the flip side to that, it meant you had Conor Thomas popping up into good positions at crucial moments in moves, and I don't think Conor Thomas is as comfortable going forward. And I would suggest, as much as I credit his gusto for getting into those areas, I don't think his decision making was quite up there, and I wouldn't necessarily have a go at Conor Thomas for that, because I think he's used to a different role. Like we saw at Cheltenham, it was very much a deep holding role, and to be honest, that's kind of where I see him at his best. Baker-Richardson missed a couple of chances in the first half. One of them was a back post header. Another one was a bit of a one-on-one, which I almost felt like he was a bit reluctant for, because as much as the ball broke kindly for him, I don't think he's necessarily the type of striker that likes to carry attacks individualistically. Is that right? Because he's not super quick. So it's like, oh, it's me, I've got to carry it forward. And I think that was probably maybe a bit of an awkward one for him. It's not really his game. I think he's much better in terms of hold-up play and maybe facilitating chances for other players. But well done to him for having the sort of assurance to to turn home the penalty. So yeah, well done to him on that score. Yeah, I think nice to see the celebrations for Ryan Cooney at the end as well. Seemed like the club wanted, or the players wanted to kind of show a bit of a public support for Ryan Cooney. So yeah, that was nice to see. And yeah, it just seems like there's a great spirit in the camp at Crewe Alexandra now, and they seem to be making a lot of progress, and great to see those scenes at the end. So, yeah, well done to Crewe Alexandra. I think that was a fantastic effort this afternoon, and I hope, yeah, their fans can just sort of enjoy the journey, really.